Hey everyone, it's Jennifer.
And it's Joniel.
Today we're going to be talking about how do you have conversations with people in your daily life just about socially sensitive topics or controversial things.
There's so much stuff going on in the world right now. Every time I go on Twitter, someone is saying, I can't go on social media without seeing something new in the news every day. And it's all over Facebook, all over Instagram, whether it's the Trump versus Hillary politics election, whether it's the LGBT stuff been going on in that community, especially with Bruce Jenner just coming out as a transgender woman, whether it's like feminist stuff, so like Sheryl Sandberg came out with a book about women in the workplace not being able to move up. And then there was also all the Black Lives Matter movement stuff going on right now between racial tension in the States with like police and like African Americans. So a lot going on, and it's spurring a lot of conversations, and we thought it was interesting because it's kind of difficult sometimes to have these conversations without it being like uncomfortable or like getting heated. And so today's video, we're not going to get into the specifics of the topics that we outlined, but we're just going to talk about in general like how to approach conversations, and especially when it's sensitive or controversial.
So there's a lot of reasons why it's difficult to have these conversations about sensitive topics, and one of the things that I struggle with for sure is when do I actually insert my opinion? When is the right time? Is there a right time? Sometimes if you don't say something, then you're also could be a bystander where you let these really, really strong opinions be like let out and no one really says anything back to it. So I find like there's a balance. So like, what would you say?
Yeah, because at the same time, you don't want to say something just for the sake of saying things, because that could be really dangerous too. Like you don't want to say things that offend people, or you know when you say things without thinking, it could just like go wrong, and then you have to like explain yourself. So I think it's definitely a fine line between the two.
I think people definitely need to be accountable to what they say, and I think it's not necessarily you shouldn't say anything, it's just you really need to make sure you kind of have an understanding of what the consequences are, the pros and the cons of what you're saying.
And just an understanding of the topic itself.
Yeah.
Like you actually have to know what's going on. Just because it's a hot topic in the news doesn't mean you have to jump and say something, right? Yeah. You have to actually like be following it and understanding what in the world's actually going on.
Yeah, and usually sensitive topics are very complex, and that's what makes it so controversial, that something you just blurt out to say as a solution, it's not always necessarily a solution because it's usually so complicated.
Yeah. So I think one of the places where it might be off limits to talk about really controversial and sensitive topics is in the workplace. And we were both reading stuff before we did this video, and one of the things was that if you're at work and you're actually in a company's building, all your activities and what you're doing and talking about should be really related to work. So, you know, are these controversial issues really helping you do your job better, helping you to like reach the company's goals and all that stuff? Probably not. Most likely not. Actually, definitely not. So then you should just kind of stay away from those conversations, especially because they're so sensitive. You don't really know people at work the way that you know people outside of work. And so you should really just focus on your work. And it doesn't, not to say that you can't talk to coworkers about it outside of work hours. If you're close and you're able to have those conversations, that's totally fine. But while you're in the company building, it's better to just focus on the actual work at hand and not all this other extra stuff.
I think like when you're having these types of conversations, you're almost like trusting that everyone coming to the table is going to be open and honest about their opinions. And when you're in an office setting, I don't think you can actually trust that everyone is open and honest, because some people might be like, you know what, this is more politics at work, so I'm going to keep my mouth shut and not say anything. And then someone else might be debating the arguments, and then they might think everyone's in agreement. But really, there are some people that are just choosing not to say stuff and just agreeing for the purpose of work business. So that's why I just don't think it's a productive thing to do at work. You're not really gonna get any like real answers.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's not a productive thing.
Another thing I think we need to keep in mind while we're having these conversations is, what is our objective? Is it supposed to be bringing people to your point of view, or is it that you think that what someone said, there might be something that has a perceived mistake that you kind of want to point out to them? I think one thing that you definitely shouldn't do, and why you shouldn't get into different arguments or debates, is if you're trying to just kind of win an argument and you just want to like prove to someone else that you're very knowledgeable in a subject, and you kind of want to like challenge them in just like kind of like an ego debate.
Yeah, or just like silence them and make you then feel like, yeah, I had the last word, I know what I'm talking about, you don't.
Yeah, I think that's what differentiates an argument and a fight. Like a fight is you want to just keep saying stuff until they have no words left, and therefore they lose and you win, and then like what are you trying to gain out of that?
Yeah, and I think those types of conversations are just really defensive. Like, you're not even like really focusing on the topic at hand anymore. You're just focusing on winning your point.
Yeah.
It's like you're just a back and forth battle. So again, not productive.
Yeah.
Another thing to think about is, what is your motivation for bringing up the conversation? Like, what is your goal? What are you trying to get out of it? And if it's just because you're curious, just because, or because you're saying something to make someone else fit in, or because you're saying something so that you can fit in, like those situations you may want to reconsider bringing up such sensitive, controversial topics. But if you're really truly just trying to understand the topic at hand so that you can be a part of change, then those are the situations where you want to enter into those type of conversations.
Yeah. What would you mean by change?
So I think with change, it could be like on both spectrums. It could be actually like something big, like joining some kind of movement or organization to help kind of bring awareness to different topics. Or it could be something small, which is just like focusing on yourself, like focusing on how you can get rid of your own biases and preconceptions that you might have of certain people and situations.
Yeah. I think when Jonelle first told me this piece of advice that she read, because I am like, I always ask her a lot of questions about things that are very sensitive topics, and when she told me this, I was like, I didn't quite understand the curiosity when I'm like, because usually I ask just because I'm curious, and I think after Jonelle talked to me, I realized the reason why you shouldn't necessarily always, like, it's not a good reason to ask out of curiosity is because usually the topics are sensitive, that you could be like kind of like poking at something that's kind of sore or whatever. Like, unless I actually was curious, but my curiosity was backed behind, it's because I want to better understand, to kind of be an open-minded citizen, so that I like take away some of my biases, then that makes sense. But if I'm just asking, just saying random questions just because it's could just be offensive.
Yeah.
So even though we said that sometimes it's not good to bring up your opinions because you might not actually be fully educated in the topic at hand and you might do a lot more damage, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't say anything at all. I think it is, you are accountable to kind of educating yourself. But then I also question, like, when people say like, oh, go educate yourself on the topic, you're ignorant. I'm like, how do I go?
Mean?
Yeah, I go, where do I start?
Go?
Should I go to like the library stack and like start like reading everything I know, or like do I start like interviewing people? Like, how do I go about educating myself? How do I know what I don't know? Right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think when we were reading online, it said to read online and to educate yourself, because there's so much information just like at our fingertips. Like, there's really no excuse to not know anything anymore. Like, you can just like Google it really quickly. And then there's other stuff, like there's workshops, conferences, and a lot of different avenues where you can get information. And then they also said that you can just talk to people, like that's fine too, but when you have to realize that when you talk to people, all you're really getting are their personal experiences. So you're not actually learning the root cause of the issue, and you really need to understand where these issues came from in order to make a difference and like progress to go forward. And it goes back to what we were saying before, that it's all about like entering these conversations because you truly want to understand to make a change. It's like you're not really going to truly understand unless you get the past, present, and then you can work towards the future. Right?
Yeah. I think it's also important that whatever medium that you're looking to find information from, you have to understand who is the person creating the content, and kind of understanding what their motivation or what their point of view is. For example, when you go on the internet, there might be websites dedicated towards a movement, and that's fine or whatever. It's just understanding that, and then you might have another website that's the extreme opposite, and they're another movement, but just understanding where everyone's from, or even like the news. Some news stations are more like backed, their funding is backed behind like someone with strong opposing views of certain things. And I'm not saying like just don't read at all. I'm just saying like just having that in the back of your mind.
Like being critical about the things that you're listening to, because I think sometimes it is good to read stuff that you don't necessarily agree with, so that you know what's going on in the world. Like, you know the kind of conversations that are being had, and you know where all this controversy is even stemming from. But at the same time, Jen's totally right with like approach it with a critical mind, so that everything you read, you're not like feeling like you have to believe it type of thing. Like, you have to come up with your own opinion at the end of the day. Educating yourself isn't just looking for external information, it's also understanding yourself really well. And I think one of the things is, especially for controversial topics that have something to do with like a majority versus a minority, whatever it may be, I think for
whether you're in the majority, to kind of acknowledge your privilege. When I read that in an article, I think that resonated with me, because I think some of the reason I think people can't really bring themselves to a place of understanding for that minority group is that they don't realize that someone doesn't have something that you don't naturally have, which is a privilege that just kind of happens. And I think by kind of like really looking into yourself and your history and realizing that you have some kind of privilege that someone else doesn't have, it kind of brings you almost closer to a place of understanding when you're having these conversations with people.
Yeah, and I think it's important because you kind of have to face the reality, because at the end of the day, it is a reality that some people have privileges over others, in order to be able to fix anything in the future. And if you can't even acknowledge that it exists, then how are you going to fix it, right? So I think that's definitely one of the steps to doing so. So there's obviously a lot of different ways where you can educate yourself, and I think the final step to educating yourself is to internalize everything that you've learned, so that it doesn't just go through one ear and out the other, but that you're actually thinking about it and reflecting on it and thinking about, do I truly understand, and how could I be a part of some kind of change?
So the third thing that I think makes these conversations so difficult to have is also because there's like a human element to it. When you're having these discussions, it's easy to start not liking the other person. So how do you have these conversations without rubbing people the wrong way?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you can do is to try and put aside your preconceptions. Like, I think a lot of times we walk into conversations or arguments with already an idea of how things should be. And sometimes those things are wrong, and it's an unconscious bias that we have. Try to kind of loosen that and go in with an open mind so that you really are trying to be more understanding.
I think when you respect the other person for having whatever opinion it may be, I think it's important to really see the argument or what they're saying for what it is, and not kind of connect it to their person as an actual being. So, for example, I think sometimes people get this like thought of like, your opinion is stupid, therefore you're stupid for having it. And people's thoughts and ideas change over time, so it's not really fair to kind of make that as them.
Yeah,
or
make that their characteristic. Yeah.
Yes.
And I think another thing too is that as humans, we probably sometimes have tendencies to not listen to people because we only want to hear what we want to hear, and we think that we know more than the other person. And I think that when we go in with that mentality too, that you rub people the wrong way because you're not actually listening to them and understanding where they're trying to come from. You're just stuck on your own opinion and your own mindset.
In these controversial topics, I think it's almost impossible for every side to say the most politically correct, the most like educated statements. I think there's a human flaw element to it, and I think it's important when you enter these discussions to know that, and just remember what the purpose is to have like these productive conversations, and not to like start pointing out people's flaws and start having arguments. You kind of almost like want to try to listen to what they're trying to say instead of literally nitpicking what they're actually saying and why what they're saying is flawed.
Yeah, I think that happens a lot in arguments, like even not just controversial issues, just arguments in general. The moment someone says something that's a little wrong, you like jump on that and you forget like everything else that they were trying to say. The conversation just becomes really defensive, and it's just more of you going back and forth, and you lose mindset of the actual topic at hand. And again, it doesn't lead to productive conversation.
Yep. So we cover a lot in this video because obviously these things are very difficult to talk in controversial conversations.
Yeah, and I think what we want you guys to take away from this video is that you really have to be conscious of what your intention is going into these conversations, and you really want to make sure that it's because you truly want to understand the topic at hand so that you can be a part of change. And I think if you really focus on that and your intentions and you're clear about it, then everything else will kind of fall in place, and you won't be, rubbing people the wrong way and doing all these other things that lead to unproductive conversation. So we really hope that you guys took something away from this video. We thought it was like really informative, so we're really happy that we did it. We learned a lot as well. And if you guys like the video, give it a thumbs up and comment below. Let us know what you think. Let us know how you approach conversational or controversial conversations, and what are some tips and tricks that you've heard along the way to kind of help you like not rub people the wrong way and have really educated, informed conversations.